Hi everyone, how are you doing today? I'm going to be sharing with you 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 of my favorite Christian novels. And the idea for this video comes from Heather and Joseph. So thank you so much for inviting the topic and asking me about this. It's funny because when you first mentioned it, I was thinking that I didn't really read any Christian fiction because haven't really explored that genre. And one of the reasons for that is that I spent a lot of time reading Victorian literature, which has sort of this cultural Christianity in it. So, it's easy to find religious themes in Jane Eyre, in the works of Charles Dickens, even in The Woman in White, which I reviewed earlier this year. A lot of these books have Christian themes in them, but I don't think that they would count for this list. They might, but I think I wanted to go a little bit stronger into this notion of Christian fiction and really choose books that are firmly themed that way. So, again, this kind of came out of a recent discussion that started with The Power and the Glory. I will link to my review of this. I won't go over it again here, but I just read The Power and the Glory, and it turned out to be one of the best books that I've read this year and in a while. A really stirring account of this priest on the run in Mexico in the 1930s and kind of his own internal struggle that he's running from as well. So this would definitely be among my favorites, in spite of its very dark backdrop and even the psychological drama in this is very dark. And that's kind of a common theme with the books that I chose. So the next one that came to mind, or one of them, is The Idiot by Dostoyevsky. This painting is actually Christ in the Tomb, 1521, by Hans Holbein. And this painting is actually referenced in the novel, which is, I think, why they chose it. But I know a lot of people really love the Brothers Karamazov. They really enjoy Crime and Punishment. And I think those two books are very obviously Christian fiction. Especially in the Brothers Karamazov, you've got the character of the priest who I think has like a whole chapter or two dedicated to one of his homilies. And you've got, of course, the saintly character of Alyosha, one of the brothers. And even in Crime and Punishment, the ending is pretty religiously bent, even though the rest of the novel isn't as much. But The Idiot is the novel that really grabbed me the most. It's about this young Prince Mishkin who is coming back to Russia after some time abroad. He suffers from epilepsy, and he's recently come into, I think it's recently, it's been a while since I read this, but at some point he came into an inheritance, and so he's kind of going back to Russia to try to re-enter Russian aristocracy. And he is a very compassionate and loving young man, and he meets the alluring and mysterious and tormented Nastasia Filipovna, who has just gone through hell and back on Earth. Oh, there's where those stickies went. I've been looking for these. So as you can see, I started rereading this not too long ago, but I've only read it once. But it's one of those books that has just haunted me my entire life since I read it in college. And I'll just think about Prince Mishkin every so often because he was Dostoyevsky's attempt at writing a saintly character, but what you find in this book is that being a saintly character in 1800s Russia, or really any time, is not an easy undertaking. And Mishkin gets torn between his agape compassionate love for people and his maybe more eros or romantic love for others, and also just all the different passions that are at play in the people around him and their drama, and of course his ongoing health struggles. And so this book actually ends in a very sad and depressing way, but I think it is a wonderful novel, and I think it demonstrates the beauty of that Christ-like life, but also that you are not going to find heaven on earth. Like, he's not going to be, he himself cannot be Jesus on earth, right? He is just Prince Mishkin trying to live the good life, but, faced with difficulties at every turn. So I really love this novel. I think it is one of the great Christian classics. For all its faults, and there are many, I still think it's quite a beautiful novel and my favorite of Dostoyevsky's thus far. So I am not actually the biggest fan of C.S. Lewis, but nonetheless, 2 of his books made it to my top tier here. And the first one I will just talk about is Till We Have Faces, a Myth Retold. So this is a retelling of Cupid and Psyche. I don't really know much about the original story, if I'm being honest, but this novel is about a very ugly sister who adopts her beautiful half-sister and just becomes incredibly obsessed with her and is completely torn up when this beautiful sister begins to drift away from her. This has some pretty creepy and interesting illustrations too, huh? I don't think it's illustrated throughout, but I guess there's a few. No, maybe just the one title page. Or no, there's other title illustrations. Anyway, there's some books that you read at a certain time of life, and it feels like that book was, something you were meant to read at that time. It doesn't happen really often with me, but it happens every so often. And this was one of those books that kind of was a wake-up call for me, because it's about idolatry, and it's about kind of this fine line between devotion and idolatry. And it's about other things too, but that was what really stood out to me and what really struck me at the time I read it. And I think if I had read it when I was younger, I don't think I would have liked it, because the protagonist is very harsh, and the ending, I think the ending's abrupt if I remember correctly. But in any case, because I read it at a particular time in life, it is one of my favorites. It's beautifully written. Gavin Ortlund did a really good book review of this. I can link to it in the description, but I think it's a wonderful novel and one of the greatest Christian novels I've read. So it's Till We Have Faces. Now, honestly, I wasn't intending to add a book from the Chronicles of Narnia, but I went back and reflected on my recent reading of The Magician's Nephew. And I always go back between The Silver Chair and The Magician's Nephew, which are my 2 favorite books of the series, or used to be way back when. And I reflected on rereading this in more recent times and just being blown away by the characterizations and, of course, the stunning tale of young Diggory Kirke and his quest to save his mother. And I just think this book, out of all the Narnia books, maybe even compared to The Silver Chair, I just think it's so full of really good characterization, nuanced characterization, strong female characters, both Polly Plummer, who is not afraid to put Diggory in his place, and Jadis, the evil sorceress, who makes her debut here. If you're reading chronologically, not if you're reading in publication order. But yeah, it is, the Narnia series is a classic for a reason. But I do think this is one of the underrated novels of the entire series. I've always really, really loved this one. So Yes, The Magician's Nephew. Just a really great Christian story, and of course has kind of this retelling of Genesis in it, so that's really neat. Now this book, I wasn't sure if I should include it because it's not explicitly a Christian novel, and I kind of like almost hesitate to include it because I think Somerset Maugham was actually an atheist. But this book ends on a very religious note, and I did a whole video review on how The Painted Veil, I wouldn't say it's like an all-out allegory, but it has very strong Christian themes in it in regards to this protagonist Kitty Fane and her ill-fated marriage with her husband, Walter, who loves her, but she doesn't feel any of the necessary attraction to him. So this book is about his expression of love for her and she learning how to love others. But what I really enjoy about this book is that while it is a redemption story, it's not like she loses who she is in the process. It's like she finds a better version of herself, and the redeemed version of Kitty Fane is still recognizable as Kitty, but it's just a more beautiful and loving expression of herself. And I think that is like the story of the Christian journey, at least in my opinion. In some ways, you surrender your entire identity to Christ and take on His identity, but you don't lose your individuality. I believe God made people different for a reason and values variety in His creation. So this kind of, I think, alludes to that. I would say fairly strongly, but obviously I was reading with a Christian lens. I will link to that video if you want to watch it, and definitely give it a read. It's a great story whether you think it's religious or not. But yes, the ending, I think, definitely points to that. Alright, so last but not least, here's a book I've been talking about on and off in the last year or two. It's called Sachiko. This is another novel by Shusaku Endo of Silence fame. And I just feel like I've been very bad at advocating for this novel, but it could also just be that it's so niche that it's really hard to get excitement around it. But basically it's about a young Japanese girl and also this boy growing up in Nagasaki and their experiences in the years leading up to and during World War II. Now, it is a whopping 400 pages, but I flew through this when I read it. And I'm going to just say that it's not his best writing. In my opinion, Endo's best writing that I've read so far would be The Sea and Poison. This is not that kind of writing. This felt a lot more, I don't know, just rough. I think it was a bit repetitive in places, and lots of tell and maybe not enough show. So why do I like this novel so much? Honestly, just the subject matter in itself is really unique. I can't think of any other World War II novels that feature Japanese protagonists, and in the middle, there is a whole, I guess you could say, interlude that follows a real-life historical figure, Father Colby, and his experience in a concentration camp. So, there's many stories like that, but told by a Japanese author. This is a very unique book, in other words. And beyond that, it goes into some very difficult questions about how should a Christian respond to war, and what's like that balance between obeying authorities, duty to your country, versus following your conscience, and thou shalt not kill. It doesn't like purport to be a pacifist novel, and I wouldn't say that it is, but it actually explores those themes very poignantly. And some of the conclusions that the characters come to are quite unexpected. Very unexpected and horrifying, I would say, but I really thought this novel was unique. I would even say original. And it deals with some very difficult topics. I would say, in general, all of these books I've mentioned deal with really hard topics. Even The Magician's Nephew, topics of grief and loss. And I think those are my favorite kinds of Christian fiction because, like, you'll run into these kinds of things. Maybe not these exact scenarios, but you will have difficulties. It's not going to be smooth sailing, and these kinds of books help you process these thoughts and experiences. So that's why these are my favorites, and of course there's that personal experience of reading them, which I've already alluded to, but that also plays into why they're special to me. So yeah, sorry that went a bit longer than I thought it would, but I hope this was at least somewhat interesting and maybe piqued someone's interest to give these a try, because I think these are all great stories regardless of whether you're a believer or not, and some of the best writing too that I've encountered. So thanks for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.